Hello there, squirrel listeners. I just looked and my Kindle here has only 39%. That's probably all I got too, so we ought to be alright. Let's hope. Let's hope a good 30 minutes. Please, Lord, please. Okay, let's see. I'll go back and read a little of what I have read before. I expect you noticed it without really noticing you were noticing, said Tommy, feeling his choice of words was rather clumsy and nearly as painfully repetitive as Tuppence's reiteration of the word funny. Did you notice it, Tommy, when we were here last time? No, but then I didn't look particularly. Oh, that picture, said Miss Packard. No, I don't think you would have seen it when you were here the last time, because I'm almost sure it wasn't hanging over the mantelpiece then. Actually, it was a picture belonging to one of our other guests, and she gave it to your aunt. Miss Fanshawe expressed admiration of it once or twice, and this other old lady made her a present of it, insisted she should have it. Oh, I see, said Tuppence. So, of course, I couldn't have seen it here before, but I still feel I know the house quite well, don't you, Tommy? No, said Tommy. Well, I'll leave you now, said Miss Packard briskly. I shall be available at any time that you want me. She nodded with a smile and left the room, closing the door behind her. I don't really like that woman's teeth, said Tuppence. What's wrong with them? Too many of them are too big, the better to eat you with, my child, like Red Riding Hood's grandmother. Lord. You seem in a very odd sort of mood today, Tuppence. I am, rather. I've always thought of Miss Packard as very nice, but today, somehow she seems to me rather sinister. Have you ever felt that? No, I haven't. Come on, let's get on with what we came here to do. Look over poor old Aunt Ada's effects, as the lawyers call them. That's the desk I told you about, Uncle William's desk. Do you like it? It's lovely. Regency, I should think. It's nice for the old people who come here to be able to bring some of their own things with them. I don't care for the horsehair chairs, but I'd like that little work table. It's just what we need for that corner by the window where we've got that perfectly hideous whatnot. All right, said Tommy. I'll make a note of those too. And we'll have the picture over the mantelpiece. It's an awfully attractive picture, and I'm quite sure I've seen that house somewhere. Now let's look at that jewelry. They opened the dressing table drawer. There was a set of cameos with a Florentine bracelet and earrings and a ring with different colored stones in it. I've seen one of these before, said Tuppence. They spell a name usually, Dearest, sometimes. Diamond, emerald, amethyst. No, it's not Dearest. I don't think it would be, really. I can't imagine anyone giving your Aunt Ada a ring that's spelled Dearest. Ruby, emerald. The difficulty is one never knows where to begin. I'll try again. Ruby, emerald, another ruby. No, I think it's a garnet. And an amethyst and another pinky stone. It must be a ruby this time, and a small diamond in the middle. Oh, of course it's regard. Rather nice, really. So old-fashioned and sentimental. She slipped it on her finger. I think Deborah might like to have this, she said, and the Florentine set. She's frightfully keen on Victorian things. A lot of people are nowadays. That's always rather macabre, I think. Oh, this is the first stole. Quite valuable, I should think. I wouldn't want it myself. I wonder if there's anyone here. Anyone who was especially nice to Aunt Ada, or perhaps some special friend among the other visitors, I mean. They call them visitors or guests, I noticed. It would be nice to offer her the stole. If so, it's real sable. We'll ask Miss Packard. The rest of the things can go to the charity, so that's all settled, isn't it? We'll go and find Miss Packard now. Goodbye, Aunt Ada, she remarked aloud, her eyes turning to the bed. I'm glad we came to see you the last time. I'm sorry you didn't like me, but if it was fun for you to not like me and say those rude things, I don't begrudge it to you. You had to have some fun. And we won't forget you. We'll think of you when we look at Uncle William's desk." They went in search of Miss Packard. Tommy explained they would arrange for the desk and the small work table to be called for and dispatched to their own address, and that he would arrange with the local auctioneers to dispose of the rest of the furniture. He would leave the choice of any societies willing to receive clothing to Miss Packard if she wouldn't mind the trouble. "I don't know if there's anyone here who would like her sable stole," said Tuppence. "It's a very nice one. One of her special friends, perhaps, or perhaps one of the nurses who had done some special waiting on Aunt Ada." "That's a very kind thought of yours, Miss Beresford. I'm afraid Miss Fanshawe hadn't any special friends among our visitors, but Miss O'Keefe, one of the nurses, did do a lot for her and was especially good and tactful, and I think she'd be pleased and honored to have it." "And there's the picture over the mantelpiece," said Tuppence. "I'd like to have that, but perhaps the person whom it belonged to and who gave it to her would want to have it back. I thought we ought to ask her." Miss Packard interrupted. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Beresford. I'm afraid we can't do that. It was a Mrs. Lancaster who gave it to Miss Fanshawe, and she isn't with us any longer." "Isn't with you?" said Tuppence, surprised. "A Mrs. Lancaster? The one I saw last time I was here, with white hair brushed back from her face? She was drinking milk in the sitting room downstairs. She's gone away, you say?" "Yes, it was all rather sudden. One of her relations, a Mrs. Johnson, took her away about a week ago. Mrs. Johnson had returned from Africa, where she's been living for the last 4 or 5 years, quite unexpectedly. She's now able to take care of Mrs. Lancaster in her own home, since she and her husband are taking a house in England. I don't think," said Miss Packard, "that Mrs. Lancaster really wanted to leave us. She had become so set in her ways here, and she got on very well with everyone and was happy. She was very disturbed, quite tearful about it. What could one do? She hadn't really very much to say in the matter, because of course the Johnsons were paying for her stay here. I did suggest that as she had been here so long and settled down so well, it might be advisable to let her remain." "How long had Mrs. Lancaster been with you?" asked Tuppence. "Oh, nearly 6 years, I think. Yes, that's about it. That's why, of course, she'd really come to feel that this was her home." "Yes," said Tuppence. "Yes, I can understand that." She frowned and gave her a nervous glance at Tommy, and then struck a resolute chin into the air. "I'm sorry she's left. I had a feeling when I was talking to her that I'd met her before. Her face seemed so familiar to me. And then afterwards it came back to me that I'd met her with an old friend of mine, a Mrs. Blenkinsop. I thought when I came back here again to visit Aunt Ada that I'd find out from her if that was so, but of course, if she's gone back to her own people, that's different. I quite understand, Mrs. Beresford. If any of our visitors can get in touch with some of their old friends, or someone who knew their relations at one time, it makes a great difference to them. I can't remember a Mrs. Blenkinsop ever having been mentioned by her, but then I don't suppose that would be likely to happen in any case. Can you tell me a little more about her, who her relations were, and how she came to come here?" "There's really very little to tell. As I said, it was about 6 years ago that we had letters from Mrs. Johnson inquiring about the home, and then Mrs. Johnson herself came here and inspected it. She said she'd had mentions of Sunny Ridge from a friend, and she inquired the terms and all that, and then she went away, and about a week or fortnight later we had a letter from a firm of solicitors in London making further inquiries, and finally they wrote saying they would like us to accept Mrs. Lancaster, and that Mrs. Johnson would bring her here in about a week's time if we had a vacancy. As it happened, we had, and Mrs. Johnson brought Mrs. Lancaster here, and Mrs. Lancaster seemed to like the place and like the room that we proposed to allot her. Mrs. Johnson said that Mrs. Lancaster would like to bring some of her own things. I quite agreed because people usually do that and find they're much happier. So it was all arranged very satisfactorily. Mrs. Johnson explained that Mrs. Lancaster was a relation of her husband's, not a very near one, but they felt worried about her because they themselves were getting out to Africa, to Nigeria, I think it was. Her husband was taking an appointment there, and it was likely they'd be there for some years before they returned to England, so they had no home to offer Mrs. Lancaster. They wanted to make sure that she was accepted in a place where she would be really happy. They were quite sure from what they had heard about this place that was so. So it was all arranged very happily indeed, and Mrs. Lancaster settled down here very well. I see. Everyone here liked Mrs. Lancaster very much. She was a little bit, well, you know what I mean, woolly in the head. I mean, she forgot things. Lord, am I woolly in the head? I'm very woolly in the head. 100% woolly in the head. Confused things and couldn't remember names and addresses sometimes. Did she get many letters? Said Tuppence. I mean, letters from abroad and things. Well, I think Mrs. Johnson or Mr. Johnson wrote once or twice from Africa, but not after the first year. People, I'm afraid, do forget, you know, especially when they go to a new country and a different life. And I don't think they'd been very closely in touch with her at any time. I think it was just a distant relation and a family responsibility, and that was all it meant to them. All the financial arrangements were done through the lawyer, Mr. Eccles, a very nice, reputable firm. Actually, we'd had one or two dealings with that firm before, so we knew about them as they knew about us, but I think most of Mrs. Lancaster's friends and relations had passed over, and so she didn't hear much from anyone, and I think hardly anyone ever came to visit her. One very nice-looking man came about a year later, I think. I don't think he knew her personally at all well, but he was a friend of Mr. Johnson's and had also been in the colonial service overseas. I think he just came to make sure she was well and happy. And after that, said Tuppence, everyone forgot about her? I'm afraid so, said Miss Packard. It's sad, isn't it? But it's the usual rather than the unusual thing to happen. Fortunately, most visitors to us make their own friends here. They get friendly with someone who has their own taste or certain memories in common, and so things settle down quite happily. I think most of them forget most of their past life. Some of them, I suppose, said Tommy, are a little, he hesitated for a word, a little, his hand went slowly to his forehead, but he drew it away. I don't mean, he said. Oh, I know perfectly what you mean, said Miss Packard. We don't take mental patients, you know, but we do take what you might call borderline cases. I mean people who are rather senile, can't look after themselves properly, or who have certain fancies and imaginations. Sometimes they imagine themselves to be historical personages. Quite in a harmless way. We've had 2 Marie Antoinettes here. One of them was always talking about something called the petite, I don't know what this is, and drinking a lot of milk, which she seemed to associate with the place. And we had one dear old soul who insisted she was Madame Curie and that she had discovered radium. She used to read the papers with great interest, especially any news of atomic bombs or scientific discoveries. Then she always explained it was she and her husband who had first started experiments on these lines. Harmless delusions are things that manage to keep you very happy when you're elderly. They don't usually last all the time, you know. You're not Marie Antoinette every day, or even Madame Curie. Usually it comes on about once a fortnight. Hang on, I want to count these. 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's still off an hour. I thought it had righted itself somehow or other, but no. It's supposed to be 9. Then I suppose, presumably, one gets tired of keeping the play acting up. And of course, more often it's just forgetfulness that people suffer from. They can't quite remember who they are. Or they keep saying there's something very important they've forgotten, and if they could only remember it, it's that sort of thing. I see, said Tuppence. She hesitated and then said, Mrs. Lancaster, was it always things about that particular fireplace in the sitting room she remembered? Or was it any fireplace? Miss Packard stared. A fireplace? I don't understand what you mean. It was something she said that I didn't understand. Perhaps she had had some unpleasant association with a fireplace, or read some story that it had happened to her. Possibly, Tuppence said. I'm still rather worried about the picture she gave to Aunt Ada. I really don't think you need worry, Mrs. Beresford. I expect she's forgotten all about it by now. I don't think she prized it particularly. She was just pleased that Miss Fanshawe admired it and was glad for her to have it. And I'm sure she'd be glad for you to have it because you admire it. It is a nice picture. I thought so myself, not that I know much about pictures. I tell you what I'll do. I'll write to Mrs. Johnson if you'll give me her address and just ask if it's all right to keep it. The only address I've got is the hotel in London they were going to, the Cleveland, I think it was called. Yes, the Cleveland Hotel, George Street, W1. She was taking Mrs. Lancaster there for about 4 or 5 days, and after that I think they were going to stay with some relations in Scotland. I expect the Cleveland Hotel will have a forwarding address. Well, thank you. And now about this first doll of Aunt Ada's. I'll go and bring Miss O'Keefe to you. She went out of the room. You and your Mrs. Blankensop, said Tommy. I know she made that up. Tuppence looked complacent. One of my best creations, she said. I'm glad I was able to make use of her. I was just trying to think of a name. And suddenly Mrs. Blankensop came into mind. What fun it was, wasn't it? It's a long time ago. No more spies in wartime and counter-espionage for us. More's the pity. It was fun, living in that guest house, inventing a new personality for myself. I really began to believe I was Mrs. Blankensop. You were lucky you got away safely with it, said Tommy, and in my opinion, as I once told you, you overdid it. I did not. I was perfectly in character, a nice woman, rather silly, and far too much taken up with her 3 sons. That's what I mean, said Tommy. 1 son would have been quite enough. 3 sons were too much to burden yourself with. They became quite real to me, said Tuppence. Douglas, Andrew, and goodness, I forgot the name of the 3rd one now. I know exactly what they looked like and their characters and just where they were stationed. And I talked most indiscreetly about the letters I got from them. Well, that's over, said Tommy. There's nothing to find out in this place, so forget about Mrs. Blankensop. When I'm dead and buried, and you've suitably mourned me and taken up your residence in a home for the aged, I expect you'll be thinking you are Mrs. Blenkinsop half of the time. It'll be rather boring to only have one role to play, said Tuppence. Why do you think old people want to be Marie Antoinette and Madame Curie of all the rest of it? Asked Tommy. I expect because they get so bored. One does get bored. I'm sure you would if you couldn't use your legs and walk about. Or perhaps your fingers get too stiff and you can't knit. Desperately, you want something to do to amuse yourself, so you try on some public character and see what it feels like when you are it. I can understand that perfectly. I'm sure you can, said Tommy. God help the home for the aged that you go to. You'll be Cleopatra most of the time, I expect. I won't be a famous person, said Tuppence. I'll be someone like a kitchen maid at Anne of Cleves Castle, retailing a lot of spicy gossip that I've heard. The door opened and Miss Packard appeared in company with a tall, freckled-faced young woman in nurse's dress and a mop of red hair. This is Miss O'Keefe, Mr. and Mrs. Beersford. They have something to tell you. Excuse me, will you? One of the patients is asking for me. Tuppence duly made the presentation of Aunt Ada's first doll, and Nurse O'Keefe was enraptured. Oh, it's so lovely. It's too good for me, though. You'll be wanting it yourself. No, I don't really. It's on the big side for me. I'm too small. It's just right for a tall girl like you. Aunt Ada was tall. Ah, she was a grand old lady. She must have been very handsome as a girl. I suppose so, said Tommy doubtfully. She must have been a Tartar to look after, though. Oh, she was that indeed, but she had a grand spirit. Nothing got her down, and she was no fool either. You'd be surprised the way she got to know things. Sharp as a needle, she was. She had a temper, though. Yes, indeed, but it's the whining kind that gets you down, all complaints and moans. Miss Fanshawe was never dull. Grand stories she'd tell you of the old days. Rode a horse once up the staircase of a country house when she was a girl, or so she said. Would that be true? Well, I wouldn't put it past her, said Tommy. You never know what you can believe here. The tales the old dears come and tell you. Criminals that they've recognized. We must notify the police at once. If not, we're all in danger. Somebody was being poisoned last time we were here, I remember, said Tuppence. Ah, that was Mrs. Lockett. It happens to her every day, but it's not the police she wants. It's a doctor to be called. She's crazy about doctors. And somebody, a little woman, calling out for Cocoa. That would be Mrs. Moody, poor soul. She's gone. You mean left here? Gone away? No, it was a thrombosis took her, very sudden. She was one who was very devoted to your aunt. Not that Mrs. Fanshawe always had time for her, always talking 19 to the dozen as she did. Mrs. Lancaster has left, I hear. Yes, her folk came for her. She didn't want to go, poor thing. Was that the story she told me about the fire? No, wait a minute. What was the story she told me about the fireplace in the sitting room? Ah, she had lots of stories. That one about the things that happened to her and the secrets she knew. There was something about a child, a kidnapped child or murdered child. It's strange, it is, the things they think up. It's the TV, as often as not, that gives them the ideas. Do you think it a strain working here with all these old people? It must be tiring. Oh no, I like old people. That's why I took up geriatric work. You've been here long? a year and a half, she paused, but I'm leaving next month. Oh, why? For the first time, a certain constraint came into Nurse O'Keefe's manner. Well, you see, Mrs. Beersford, one needs a change. But you'll be doing the same kind of work? Oh, yes. She picked up the first doll. I'm thanking you again very much. And I'm glad, too, to have something to remember Miss Fanshawe by. She was a grand old lady. You don't find many like her nowadays. Thanks to the good Lord, I finished a chapter. Well, I didn't start it. And it's not 30 minutes, but it's close to it. And I'm still going strong, but I'm going to stop there so we can start with chapter 5 next time. And it's called A Disappearance of an Old Lady. Has Mrs. Lancaster done a bunk? We'll find out. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Love y'all. Hope to see you live at 5. Tea with me, GrannyDee, tomorrow. Bye-bye.